It is great to be with you guys. This is Wednesday, June 19th. It is Juneteenth. So it might be a slower week this week because some people are actually taking the day off. Some agencies are closed. But a big topic still. And Joe, how about you say hello and we can kind of kick off our subject today?
Hey everybody, for those of you who do not know me, I'm new at RevThink, sales advisor. I'm officially in, I think it's my second or third week here. So had the great pleasure of meeting a handful of you, but it's nice to see those of you I haven't.
Yeah, it's fun to have you jumping in and out of these meetings. Um, I swear I'm already kind of sad how busy you are with your schedule, but we're going to fit you into more capabilities. The big thing we're doing next week is the foundations class, and this it's very relevant, the foundations class and our subject this week, because a lot of the people in that class are that smaller studio size, and I don't think any of them popped up like really recently, like in the last 6 months, like we're seeing kind of a boom happening, but still kind of recognizing what that smaller studio is capable of doing more and more. It does feel like there's a competitive moment happening. The smaller studios are kicking in. The startups are kind of building up more and more, and a rise to startups specifically in the last 6 months. You've seen some of that too before you even joined us, and coming from the agency space just a year ago.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons I think is when we think about technology, it's very easy for a person to look like an agency. It's very easy for a person to produce the quantity and relative quality of an output of an agency without the sort of overhead that we're used to. And so the risk for sort of taking that leap and doing your own thing is, I think, fairly significantly mitigated.
Yeah, I think so too. Like let's say like the filters seem to have changed. That obviously the 2020 filter of everyone work from home. So that idea of like you have to be a central location doing centralized stuff on centralized servers, that changed. The coming back to work requirement is kind of giving birth to this, that people are a little bit more resistant. They might have pivoted and moved away from those mega centers, but still have a capability. So instead of jumping back into someone else's studio, they're saying, no, I'm just gonna start my own studio, get something started. And the legitimacy question isn't really, something someone's struggling with. Of course, you can be viable working from home. We've proven that for a few years. So you can be competitive in that space.
Yeah, the relative fame of the wall art on your studio is no longer an indicator of whether a client can trust you, and that's a big deal.
That's really awesome. I'm going to share with you guys this quote from a friend of mine. I've known this guy for so many years, and he basically has, I'm not going to say bounce around for different studios, but he's been in the industry long enough to be at different agencies, large agencies. And I was catching up with him recently, just called me out of the blue. And he threw this at me because we were talking about all the different trends that are happening. And when it came to these small studios, he says, listen, friends of mine who all got laid off are now available as their own studio. And I don't need to change much, and I can get the same amount of work done. So he's really just recognizing like what we might call white labeling is like it's so easy. And people that were in house at agencies, some of them got laid off. It's been slow, as there's not surprise. They're out there in the marketplace, and the people remaining are like, yeah, but can I just hire you? And so this like launch, I could launch my agency with an old friend, like my old colleagues, the old place I used to work, and that's like giving birth to new studios. Straight out of the gate, you can find a client or have a client and get started. That is such a quick infusion of work and stability for a studio. It allows people to take that risk and put some branding out on a website and call themselves a different name, doing the same job.
Yeah, I do think we've covered, right? There's a freedom and flexibility aspect. There is certainly an opportunity to kind of dive in without changing too much. And then at the end of the day, when we think about budgets shrinking, grabbing as much of that for yourself as possible, as opposed to being the person who continues to build someone else's business, makes as much sense now as it has ever. It really feels a bit like the three Fs.
Oh yeah, yeah. The fame, fortune, and freedom, right? You can understand people who would want to at some point, if this is the tipping point, especially if they got a little bit of taste of it being at home over the last couple of years, and say like, oh wait, this is one the moment I can go for fame. I could make myself known, not be inside of someone else's studio or at someone else's agency. I can just start my own and begin my entrepreneurial efforts that way. Fortune, the idea of like, there's not the ups and downs of paychecks. If you've been a freelancer, that your rates have gone up and down. It's not really matching what it was a few years ago, or even just trying to get consistency of work. If you are dependent on a studio or an agency to bring you on, instead of you being that studio or agency going to get your own clients, you're kind of finding that Fortune foothold on things. God, there's a lot of F's in that one. But the last one, freedom. I think that, some of what's driving today's culture are our work product that is just mundane. It's ongoing. It's robotic. And I have a feeling some people are being a little Pollyanna-ish about what's out there and are saying, well, maybe I can go win these really great, huge jobs that right now I'm being handed off the work I don't want to do. And they want to choose their own paths, so the freedom path. So you're right. There is kind of a fame, fortune, freedom element that's happening right now. And the technology advancement or the opportunity is kind of inviting more people into those dreams.
I definitely think,
Oh, go ahead.
and we touched on this, but I feel it can't be overstated that it's not just working in a hub and coming into an office versus getting the work done at home. There is a culture shift that every business has had to go through over the past 4 or 5 years. Some are handling it well and some are handling it poorly. If you think for even a second that your culture is going to go back to the way it was 5 years ago in terms of the way people interact, the ways they show up, you are immediately alienating your most talented people who see that they're not required to do that. So especially when we talk about the biggest studios and the biggest agencies, I just feel like it can't be said enough that if you were trying to shove a 2024 shaped peg into a 2019 shaped hole, if you will, you're going to have a problem and you're going to bleed talent. And that's where some of that sort of entrepreneurial groundswell has got to be coming from.
Yeah. I wonder if the entrepreneurial edge comes out of, a desperate moment or an opportunist moment here, right? Because the desperation out there of how things have shifted, rates are changing, that kind of stuff. You could, as a smaller studio or a startup studio, jump in and say yes to projects that the studio you just left or other studios are saying no to. They can't afford to take on that less expensive work. And we all know, the whole industry knows, well, you're talking about commoditization. We should not have people ask for smaller prices. Please don't encourage that. And I'm not. What I'm saying is if I was a startup and people are saying no to certain projects and I could do it, the 60-hour week starting my business is the moment I have to start it. It's what people are jumping into as an opportunity. But the other side of that is the what you can jump into now with the capabilities of technology allows you to present something differently. And I'm not talking about AI, like making something out of nothing. I'm just talking about the advancement of technology. This moment reminds me very much of the early desktop revolution that was taking place in the 2000s. I'm gonna say 2004, 2008 was the biggest growth cycle of that. It's when I launched RevThink was when my buddies were all starting their studios and they needed help with operations. So I became that freelance problem solver, soon to be, consultant. And this feels like the very same kind of movement. There's a technology advancement, there's opportunities that are out there. There's a crush going on in the economy that's pushing people to it. And they're popping up looking for their own kind of guidance and path.
And along the technology line too, while we're probably not talking about AI doing the work for you, we are talking about it making you look bigger than you are. I always call that the pufferfish strategy, right? How do you blow up and seem like you're a bigger thing? But like the same meeting recorder and transcriber I feed into a custom GPT that knows my tone and it spits out next steps. Account executive, don't need you, right? Junior producer, maybe don't need you. And so all of a sudden, I look like I am capable of 5x the work that maybe one human being is. And then my pitch doesn't look so it doesn't look as hard to compete with a mid-size or a big studio as it would have if I was just like, oh, I'm here, I have experience, and I started a new thing. I've got a team now. It doesn't matter if that's a robot or a person.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the features that we're seeing in this trend, because these what's happening, I'll call it the rise of the startup studio, is the fact that these startup studios are becoming legitimate. You know what I mean? Like they're being recognized as something that's real. So one of the things I feel is shifting is the white label economy, where people were saying, hey, I'll bring you on as a specialist, or I'll use you as an outsourced studio, but don't ever put this work on your reel. Don't tell people you work for us. You're all just white label, which really just reduces the studio to a freelancer with a LLC name. And I'm seeing the rise of the studio, meaning more and more people are saying, I did this job. So the white label push, and I think you have a pretty good, strong opinion about the white label ideas.
I do. When I was coming up in agencies, it was the only thing talked about, but it was like a dirty word. Whether you were providing white label services or you were white labeling them, there was an intense need to clarify hierarchy of who was performing the work. And there was an expectation as a small agency, you're going to cut your teeth by white labeling for me. If you get enough of this experience, I will let you leak out one case study and maybe you can go get them on your own. But as I think about the small agencies I grew, that was the way we've had our families. And the shift I'm seeing both on the agency side and the studio side is saying you subcontract a specialist or a shop with specialized abilities is less a sign of weakness and more a sign of strength than I think it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah, very much. Very much. And I don't, that permission being granted element, I feel like there's a residue of kind of BS that imagine you being the producer at a studio and being asked to reach out to another studio but call it white label. And you have to be thinking in your head, why? Like that, come on, we're bigger than that, we're more knowledgeable than that. Why are we holding them back? And those gatekeepers are kind of asking the bigger questions of, does this really matter anymore? Is that really where we're winning our projects or losing our projects if we do that? So that I think those veils are being dropped down. Okay, so another big feature that's coming out of this thing is not just the white label element being out of permission, but there's also like a degree of education, I'll call it, like where people right now want to know, I'm going to bring you in because you know something unique, and I want that specialty to come zipping right into my studio without me having to learn it myself. And there's these advancements in technology are asking for more and more specialists to be pulled right into being infused into studios.
And part of that is there's no longer a fear that culture will be disrupted, that workflows will be disrupted, or that a studio whose core competency is X is in some way threatened by a person or studio whose core competency is Y. 1 + 1 has always equaled 3. We just sort of haven't noticed, or we didn't used to.
And then Ryan, that's my next. I want you to jump in on this one here because you're going right down the same path as me, seeing the same things to me. I'm going to grab Ryan's spotlight here for a second. Why don't you ask that question and jump in on this last
Sorry,
thing
I posted a bunch. Was it which one did you want me to?
No, the battle between point of pride commission.
Oh yeah, we're running into it, right? Like I feel like my old world mentality of IF and other places was like you try to sell like you have this like veneer of quality and aura of you can't get it from anywhere other than us. And there was a battle amongst clients sometimes to acquire that. Like I want the point of pride to commission you to make this thing for me. And we're running into now where our friends on client side sometimes are like, look, I'm being told we need to be, it's the same thing the tech world's going through, right? Like I need to be efficient. I don't need to just make beautiful stuff or a lot of stuff. I need to prove that this is getting done and it's going to move the needle. And it's more of like unit shifting right now. And it feels like they're almost like, sorry, like we're sorry we have to do this to you, but you have to show us how you're going to be able to, be more efficient, or you can move the needle, or can you cut the price down? And sorry to have to do it this, or it's that, or we're just going to give it to somebody off the truck. Like we're just going to pull it off and get it and put it up. Like it's a very, it feels very tangible right now.
Yeah. And if you think of it from a startup position, they can step into that more and more and say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I can actually prove my specialty and prove my capabilities. We're an established studio. might not be able to compete. So if you were ever thinking about starting a studio, this might be the moment of like, oh, the world just got flat. The earth just got flat
Yeah.
again, and I can step into something new. Yeah, interesting kind of momentum, isn't it? I like how you called it point of pride commission, of like,
Yeah.
what that specifically means of that capability for our studio.
I'm personally honestly shocked it's taken this long. I mean, I can remember with IF going to movie studios and it just being like, oh, you worked with who and you did what? And then we went to Riot Games one day and they're like, I don't care who, none of that means anything to me. What are you
Yeah.
gonna do for me? We're Riot Games. And that was the first, like, that was probably 7 or 8 years ago. And that was the first time a bell rang off my head. I was like, whoa, something changed. Something changed drastically, but it feels like it's hitting momentum now.
I'm curious about this. Ryan, you can say it on if you want to jump
Mm.
off, but I'm curious about this too, is that it feels like the media buy space is changing. So the direct to brand now, you know, a newer studio can go direct to brand or have someone at a brand and get a job right away. And then the work they're going to do skips all traditional media buys and goes to an influencer marketplace.
Mhm.
There are so many agencies that are popping up, coming into RevThink, asking questions about how to grow their business. And they've been basically gathering up these influencers and really doing larger media pushes than, I don't know, say like traditional studios that were doing one-off commercials or not as frequent in that field.
Mhm.
So I think that shift, that what the brand direct is asking for and what they expect, where the media purchase is going to be or the media is going to be seen, major shift taking place. And if you're too traditional, you're not going to know how to even be in that marketplace at all.
Even speak the language. Even speak the language. Like it makes sense to me, right? Like you can get volume because it's cheaper. You can get direct access to very targeted, audiences, going to specific influencers, and you can get return knowing the data coming back. Like, oh, how many people saw it? How many people watched it? How many people clicked versus like a traditional broadcast or a traditional kind of like ad buy. Like I'm shocked that there aren't more companies that are just like, why would I do this? And if you don't know what this is, why would I go with you?
Yeah.
It's yeah. The ground is shaking.
Yeah.
And your third point, Ryan, I think is really salient. There's conversation like, well, influencers are better because they're cheaper, because they're more natural, because people like them more. It's like, no. It's because they put their money where their mouth is,
Yeah.
right? If you give me X, I will return Y. And
Mhm.
so the question for studios then is like, what do we have to offer that will, like, if you give me X, we will return Y? It's a really big
I mean,
question.
I mentioned this on LinkedIn somewhere yesterday, and I got a lot of people like throwing heat back at me. But I was like, "Do you know a studio that touts the data on their like the returns of their work, or the efficiency of their work, or their ability to create affinity in hard numbers? Have you ever seen a motion design studio ever either tout that from firsthand data, or even at least get a referral from someone who said that?" But I can tell you 1,000 studios I can say, I made a really pretty thing that won an award of my peers. I mean, I literally think like that's like, are we literally watching ourselves turn into dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Like, is that even the need or the desire anymore? It's really, it's eye-opening hearing you say that.
I was actually going to say that the youthful quality of our industry is showing itself. And what happens is, and again, like I saw a shift 20 years ago that seems to replicating itself here, which is the adaptability of a youthful group and the knowledge of what needs to come. The purpose, as well as the lower cost, allows for a totally different competitive marketplace, which then makes a new market. So now brands are hungry for that market that has been innovative somewhat, of people who weren't working for agencies in the last 5 years. But those of us who've been working at agencies for 5 years have been doing old model stuff because that was paying the bills. And now the gap is bigger, and trying to jump that gap is going to be very difficult for some. Yeah.
And Andrew, I see your data point, and I agree. I actually spoke with a studio owner who was early in their entrepreneurship journey, and they literally said, "Am I allowed to ask for the data?" Like they were genuinely wondering if that was an okay thing to ask a brand or an agency partner. And so part of it is because there's a bit of an old world model. If we haven't gone upstream and asked what is the thing for and how are you measuring it and what can I know, like what can I do to make it better against that measurable before you made the thing, like 9 times out of 10 is way too late. It's like, cool, you made this thing, it either worked or it didn't. I don't really care to tell you. That's also a very tricky sort of relationship element to navigate.
Don't we already know the data though? Like if you're posting something on social media, aren't you seeing the comments and the likes and whatever on those posts. Maybe not across the whole spectrum, but you know, the ones that go viral, anybody that touched those viral elements are throwing that stuff on their social media feeds and claiming that they did that work.
But there's other, I don't know if you guys can hear me. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
other numbers. There's other, you know, data points that your clients tend to be looking for that are not just like, did it go viral? Because honestly, like, how many times do we get it to go viral, especially now with so many screens and so many eyeballs? Like, it's harder every day to make something go viral. I know one of the things that I don't know, just by getting my head bashed in by the door all the time is that I've learned to do is in the beginning, when you're trying to figure out, you know, asking like, what is success going to look like? If data comes up, that's the opening is, okay, cool. When we're into that part, can we get that data? Since data is part of the success for this piece of media or this package that we're creating, like, can we get that data? And it's a lot easier to ask that in the beginning. There is some weird thing that happens where it's like it becomes wrapped up in some like possible proprietary bag if you ask after the fact. Like, I don't know why that reaction happens, but it's different. And I've seen it happen over and over again. If I ask after the fact, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could share that.
I think that's all covered because no one wants to be able to be held accountable. You see it in the entertainment side as well, right? Right, Mike, you know this, Tim, right? Like, people hate when their numbers come out because they know that that's after 3 years of a development and 2 years of making a movie and all the marketing. Like, if opening weekend is like 2% lower than what like predictions were, what tracking was, immediately there it is. It doesn't matter if people liked it, if like, they don't want to share the data if it didn't do well, right? Like, and I think no one ever really does a good job setting up at the beginning. So it's always like, there's a way to look at the data sideways that doesn't look like something performed. And it's like, I'm not sharing that with you because I don't want my boss to know, or I don't want somebody else to know, right?
I want you to buy my spin of the data. I don't want
Yeah,
you to get the data yourself and do up your own spin. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the answer is always fear. Whenever you get to those, like, why can't you just tell me? It's like, they're afraid to.
And a little bit from my experience running an agency, it was just like, if it hadn't been discussed and you asked me after the fact, I rarely cared whether you saw it as much as like, I don't have time to give you this data. Like, I don't have time to tell you the thing you want to know. But to your point about fear, I also can't risk you looking at that data and telling a different story that my client might see than I sold to them, whether the thing was good or bad. That was a crippling, paralyzing fear. Like, I can't have a separate narrative about this that I don't own. It was tricky.
So, Joe, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but I am curious, is there a possibility or just something in the positioning of who you are when you go into that engagement that allows you to have data over people who don't? And is it something that people could learn and the business development team can present themselves with that capability?
I love that question. And it's one of the reasons I am coaching in jobs to be done theory. Everyone is capable of doing the thing all the time. Otherwise, your studio wouldn't even exist. If your BD team can attach a line of questioning around like, not just what is the thing and what are the specs and why are we so excited about it, but truly what is the job to be done here at the brand level? What is the thing it's going to accomplish? If you ask that question early enough, literally before they select, you have a right to know the answer. And then all of a sudden your next pitch was the answer to a question or the solution to a problem and not the way the thing got made. That shift isn't easy and you're going to swing and miss a bunch of times before you get one. But the second you have a case that says, look at the thing, but actually don't, first listen to what it did, the conversations in the room slowly start to shift in terms of the value you're adding.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just curious because I feel like the push to want to advance. So we're talking about the startup stage, and that's why it's a little bit of a tangent to ask that question. But the idea to want to advance of why someone's willing to take the risk and actually work their ass off and start a studio, not be under someone else's umbrella, whatever that stuff is the idea of, can I ask and can I get it, do something differently than the guy before? And if this is a moment that's taking place, an opportunity for people to speak up, this could be an advancement, to Ryan's point, advancement from an industry point of view, that as a designer, you can get part of the larger strategic position. That's curious. And that is an advancement, even in engagement, all the way down to what you deliver. We talked about a little bit these 3 S's before we jumped on our call, Joe: scrappy, specialization, and security. are the three S's. And to some degree, I think our industry is asking for these things, right? They're asking for a scrappy nature, people that can kind of pick up the pieces. To Ryan's point, something like the students turning in their homework, not expecting good grades, kind of a thing. Like, it just be scrappy. Or an engagement of specialization. That's like my buddy who said, you don't get it. I had these specialists, they got laid off, but I still need them. And my friend's calling it a studio, go for it. Use my money, start your studio. And this last one, security, was just that risk factor. Can I offset my risk to you as an outside studio? I'm more willing to jump things. Maybe it's Ryan's fear game. Like, I'm going to throw it off to you, so it's your fault, not mine, if I am one of the last men standing at my brand.
Two things have happened, Tim, since I started hanging out with you. I just like think in alliteration now. Number one. But number two, as we were talking about results, a fourth S occurred to me, which is strategy. And it's a new type of selling point that, again, if we're going to refer to the established studios as dinosaurs, whether or not that's fair or true, it's very easy to create a challenger position around your strategic capability as well.
Yeah. So if the four S's now, right? Scrappy, specialization, security, and strategy are all now part of a new pie that we're baking. What are the features that we want to have? If any one of us wanted to go jump and start a studio tomorrow, what would we say no to, and what would we say yes to, in order to make ourselves viable in this marketplace? Ryan has an opinion already, I know.
I mean, I've been asking this a lot. Like, if you're going to start a studio now, would you even organize it the same way? Would you have an EP, and would you have 2 CDs and like a producer and a production coordinator, or would you be like, I need one creative, one operational person, one person who understands data and social, right? Like, could it be smaller than a traditional studio? Yes, but would you even say that you're a motion design studio anymore, even outward facing? Would you organize it in the same way? Would you, like, because I feel like our industry, at least the people that started shops up until now, are like, I want someone to pay me to make something pretty and fun for me to make. And that's the transaction. Like, it'll be the compromise is, I'll have to make it for advertising, but it's still at the end of the day a good job, and it's safe and secure and fairly easy. But I feel like our clients, as they're changing, that's not even what like they're looking for anymore, right? Like, they're not looking to win an award, or they're not looking, like, they're looking for like definable, tangible things that help them move up their career, right? Like, oh, I sold this much more on Amazon because this ad campaign that looked like this with this tagline. Like where is the sandwich video in motion design? Like, where's the Adam Lissagor of motion design, where it's like, yeah, I can make a video, I can make animation. The only difference between the two of them is they make videos with live action and we do animation. But that dude has deal flow and trust and is looked on as a partner, and sandwich videos grown exponentially because they're looked on as like these expert level partners that I don't know many motion design studios that are even want to be that, know how to do it, or even understand that that's kind of like where the game's going. Maybe
it's because we went to design school. We didn't go to marketing school. Yeah.
And if you branded yourself an engagement studio as opposed to motion design studio, what do you think would happen in terms of the rooms you even get in, let alone what?
I mean, you can still internally be a motion design studio. You just happen to have one more or two more people that do the kind of engagement, social, data tracking, LinkedIn targeting, advertising side of things than you might have designers. Right? It's just like a matter of proportion in terms of who you employ.
Ryan, you said something that really hit a bell that I almost needs its own topic in the future, but the term Marcom has being used more in conversations at its studios than I've heard in my entire career.
Yeah.
And to think that, like, you need a Marcom person, you need a marketing and communications person that understands what your clients' needs are and communicate those needs to your clients, not a producer who's delivering tasks and making sure things are on thing, but to understand the overall communication level.
Yeah.
Almost like, internal marketing going out, like your own internal PR firm, making sure everyone on the outside is doing it. And I think it's because the reach is so big. Hey, when I give this to the agency, it's going to go to 4 influencers up the food chain here, 7 distributors, whatever that thing is. And so you have to be really clear of what your expectations are. It's not a single analog channel that your deliverables are going through anymore.
I mean, should that, yeah, I mean, should that producer who's historically been the point person for a contact with the client who understands like a Gantt chart, waterfall, production style workflow based off of like live action principles, should that be the person that's actually interacting with the client anymore? Or should it be that more like creative producer, Marcom kind of person who understands a different level of it? And then that person who's typically at the top of the chain as a producer is now more like second, third tier. You're going to handle the flow of the work, but you're not handling the chain of like command next to the client.
And for what it's worth, and Andrew, I see your question as well. It wasn't until I ran my own agency that I was even interfacing in a meaningful way with folks like you. When I was a junior planner, shit, when I was a strategy director at a national agency, I was very afraid to be in the room with the production folks. Like, these folks speak a language I don't speak. I'm gonna look stupid, whatever. But we're all actually craving sort of like we're craving the same conversation, and we're all craving the same seats at the same table. So when I think about that person being a purple unicorn, it's maybe just a person who needs to be invited from an agency to a studio one time.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Or is it trained up? Are they the younger risk takers that are trying to make their career, or someone is starting a studio today? They're like, if that's what I need to, they didn't know that they didn't need them. So they grab somebody on, and it might be not a quality that we'd all agree to, but at least it's somebody doing it. In 3 years, they're going to be ahead of the curve. It's really interesting, huh? This pop-up moment is another one of the big indicators of what's happening in our industry globally. One of the things I'll as to wrap this up a little bit too, is just get the sense of like, just because there's smart new studios popping up doesn't mean that they're taking from the whole pie. These were possibly freelancers that were doing that work anyway. There were formerly at an agency, now being freelance, what have you. So currently we can't see that. If you let this thing play out, all these firms are going to start to mature. And that's what we're looking at. It, being a futurist, I'd say it's not today. This is just an indicator of what 2027 is going to look like. And we should be very aware that we have to be thinking and investing towards a 3-year plan that can kind of absorb whatever this new economy is going to be that happens in the next 3 years. Yeah.
And to that end, mimicking some of the scrappiness we're seeing to make sure that your studio stays viable doesn't necessarily mean zigging the same way the category is zigging and all of a sudden taking lower sort of paying jobs than you're used to. But it does mean being inescapably clear about what you do and don't do today, and what you think you could and could not do, to your point, Tim, tomorrow. And without that lens, it's very scary to wonder, do I need to be behaving differently today because studios are popping up? I think the answer is probably no, if your studio's solid. But it's an intriguing question.
Yeah, very interesting. And the opportunity is there. Well, listen, if you are a studio just starting up and you want to get some foundations underneath it, the foundations class does start next Tuesday, and we're happy to have you join us. In the class, we're going to cover the entrepreneurial elements of running a business, obviously, but it's specifically sales, production, and finance, and how those things work together to make a system. Because you have to kind of build the machine if you're going to jump into it. It's not just the competitive edge that we've been talking about in this conversation. There's a lot more to it than just winning the projects and getting the work and having the right words. But every day you have to show up and run your business. So some of these startups, I'm pretty sure, are going to be asking those questions in a year and a half of like, so it's not just stringing a series of projects together and running a business. And that might be a new change that we'll see here too, as people will give up on some of these entrepreneurial edges. But I think we are seeing a new level of communication. And Ryan, I think you're kind of attuned to that. You're kind of seeing that more and more with the questions you're asking. Thank you guys very much for jumping in here. And Ryan, thanks for jumping in last minute. Joe, it's always great to collaborate with you and do this stuff.
Likewise.
And it was really great to be part of this thing. Please feel free to add more questions, more thoughts, keep the conversations going in RevCommunity. I'll post this video there if you want to watch that and have conversation. I think there's something we're going to watch as a trend a little bit over the next year and a half and see if we can't. Gosh, I wish there's a way, like you guys want data. I want to get studio starts as like some sort of, federal data code that I can look at and see. But we'll kind of get a sense of what's going on and some purpose that's happening there. And until next week, you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll see you in the community.